a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and a geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and Geek, the interrupted by WBC version. I am John Bonus of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of BFF.
John is back in Fort Myers.
I'm back in Fort Myers.
I am still on my couch. Actually not. I'm in the fancy office, which is also known as a second bedroom.
It looks very nice, by the way. I like the fern in the background.
Oh, I have 1 ounce of say in decorating this room, and that's how I like it.
The fern was all you. That was your contribution.
Yeah. There is leather wallpaper. I don't know if you noticed that. That's
very nice. I think I saw the leather wallpaper when it was being after it had been installed before everything else had been put in there.
Yeah. Turned out it was a little bit of a tricky install.
Yes, I recall that was a difficult. Yes, that was a problem.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm in a nice office here talking to you about the return of John to Fort Myers, but like half the Twins team have exited
right
to go to their respective WBC teams. Although, well, no, because Duran was he the only Dominican rostered player, and he opted out. But the Dominican team was played the Twins yesterday in an exhibition game. They're managed by Nelson Cruz, so it's sort of a little bit of a crossover there. But I know everybody was excited to see Nelson Cruz back. But yeah, the Twins had, I think, double-digit players, and that's even with Duran, Carlos Correa, and Jose Miranda opting out of the WBC. And then there were obviously other players like, I don't know, Jorge Polanco, who were never really in the mix because of an injury last season. So it's going to be an interesting camp. And I think Baldelli kind of talked like the last couple of days before I came back, so last week or last weekend, I guess, about how it might affect their cuts, like the timing of cuts and how quickly they trim Major League Camp down. Because around this time, 3 weeks out, something like that, you'd start to see guys who are not in the mix at all, like true minor leaguers, like even someone like Brooks Lee, honestly, like a top prospect, but a guy going to Double-A would start to get trimmed from what started as 70 players in Major League Camp, because at this point in a typical spring, they stopped doing split squads. They're trying to ramp up starting pitchers and relievers to get, not just 1 or 2 innings, but 3 or 4 innings. So there's just fewer innings to go around to the non-veteran guys who are in the mix for the opening day spots. And, instead of taking 1 or 2 at-bats in a game, the veteran hitters will take 2 or 3 at-bats in a spring game. So there's just less playing time to go around, and you want to trim that down. And it's always funny. Like I remember a couple years ago, or maybe last year, we were there for cut down day, and it's emotional for a lot of guys. Like even if you really didn't think you were going to make the team, it's fun for these guys to be in big league camp and shoulder to shoulder with, Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton and stuff. And some guys, usually not the first round of cuts, but the second or third round of cuts, are legitimately young guys who think they're going to maybe make the team. So there's some tears shed occasionally. And there's a lot of just veteran minor league guys who this might be their last shot to make an opening day roster. And that kind of hits them hard. It's also
it is a somber day on the last day of cuts.
Well, the last day of cuts for sure. Yeah, because then they're going from like 30 to 26 or 32 to 26 or something like that. It's that nitty gritty, actual decisions being made. But it was also weird. I remember being in there the day they made the first round of cuts, because they remove. This will only make sense to John because he's the only one, I'm assuming, listening. And I guess Betsy listens to this too. She's been in the clubhouse, that spring clubhouse. But
we got some people.
Okay, so we got plenty of people who've been in the clubhouse. It's not that exclusive a club, but they remove that sort of initial middle bank of lockers, because that's the temporary bank. That's like right now, it was like Aaron Sabato and Chris Williams and Ed Julian, like all the Double-A, Triple-A guys who are like, well, they're not really competing for a spot on the team, but we're going to put them front and center here. And then you come in one morning just expecting that to still be the case, and that whole block of lockers has just been removed because 10 players have been removed or whatever. So it's an interesting, but getting back to my original point, 44 minutes later, as I'm wont to do, Baldelli kind of said, well, it might not be a typical cut situation, because we're losing like 10, 12 guys to the WBC. So the idea that
Right.
we don't have enough playing time to go around, it might be the opposite. We might need bodies. Like
Right.
we might need Brooks Lee to stick around a little bit longer. We might need
Right.
Eddie Julian to stick around a little bit longer, which is not such a bad thing, in my opinion. I mean, they would like Pablo Lopez and I think probably especially Christian Vasquez to be
Right.
in camp this whole time. But you know, it's they're not alone in losing key players to the WBC.
Well, and
So, yeah,
there was also the extra benefit of it. Sounds like there were a fair number of players who were getting ready for this season who hit the ground running in spring training
Right.
camp because they were also preparing for the WBC. Pablo Lopez is a really good example. I think Julian's actually a pretty good example.
Yep.
Now, he said one of the reasons he got to camp like a month early was because, you know, it's snowing up in Canada. Like,
Yeah, he's from Quebec, and
there are not a lot of great places to work out there. So yeah, Florida sounds pretty good.
When
About
he
middle
said
of
that,
January, right?
yeah, he gave this long answer. We were like, well, how long you been here? When'd you come? And he was like, I was here like in January. Like I was here
Mhm.
3 weeks before, you know, the mid-February report date. And we're like, oh, wow. He's like, yeah, I wanted to see as much live pitching because there are always people here at the complex. Here, I say in Minneapolis, but I'm really talking as John in Fort Myers. In a hotel in Fort Myers. There are always people in that hotel in Fort Myers. But he's like, I want to see as much live pitching as possible. And we were like, before the WBC, because he's gonna be on Team Canada. And we were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then there was like a pause, and he goes, also, I'm like from Quebec and like there's snow on the ground. So I just wanted to kind of be outside and see the sun. And I was like, buddy, you are gonna make a tremendous Minnesotan someday with that attitude. Because that's really when I said to John, why are you going to Fort Myers on, you know, February 9th? And that's basically what he said. He said, I want to see as much live pitching as possible, but also I'm sick of the snow in Minnesota. So
one of the reasons I like covering spring training is because, you know, I like baseball. I like spring training. I like that. I also just like having my winter in Minnesota end in the middle of February.
Yeah.
So the worst part of winter is the end of February and the first all of March, basically. When the rest of the world no longer has winter, but you do in Minnesota still.
Did we already discuss this on the podcast, or was this just a stupid discussion we had at like Potts Sports Bar in Fort Myers where I said, is Fort Myers the place you've been second most?
This was not on the podcast. This was in the press box.
Okay.
But
you said Philly probably, and also you spent a month in Russia.
Yeah, well, I spent 3 months in Russia, 3.5 months in Russia. So,
but you might be catching up to that.
I might be catching up to that. Yeah, that's right. I think we're in fourth place. I think spring training is in fourth place. Fort Myers is in fourth place, but it's close to the Soviet Union.
I've amended my list, which is a much funnier and shorter list because I don't go anywhere, obviously. Like the 2 weeks, I spent 15 nights in Fort Myers just now, and I believe, other than going away to summer camp when I was like a teenager,
right,
or a preteen, that's the longest I've ever been away from home. And I will say, by like day 12, I was like, I want to go back home.
Well, you're counting Northfield as the same thing as Minneapolis, though, too. So, but yes.
Yeah, your college, yeah, because otherwise, unless you left the state.
Minnesota as a whole is number one, right?
Correct.
And then, then Philadelphia, and then maybe Russia, and then maybe Fort Myers, Florida.
That's such a funny list to me. Minnesota, Philadelphia, Russia, and then Fort Myers, Florida. Like what? Okay, fine. You just chose out of a hat there.
Right.
I'm amending mine to say, I thought Fort Myers, other than Webster, Wisconsin, which is where I spent like 4 or 5 weeks twice for a summer at Herzl Camp, overnight camp, which I guess that counts. But I was going to say Fort Myers was probably second now behind Minnesota because I've spent, a couple weeks there now, 4 years in a row or whatever. But I forgot that I went to spring training in Arizona for like 8 years, just as like with my uncle.
True. But what?
So
that was for a week?
Yeah, about a week at a time, roughly. But we also went to the Arizona Fall League and all that. This is probably not interesting to anybody. It's barely interesting to me. So I don't know.
We'll move on, right? Yeah, we spent a lot of time in Fort Myers.
The one bit of, I don't know. My point was Fort Myers is sad to be on anybody's top 5 list. Like that's where I've spent my most time. Like I need to go to like Antarctica or something to knock that off the list. The biggest piece there hasn't been huge news, obviously. There's been drips and drabs, mostly injury stuff that we've spent time talking about, which is depressing, obviously, after last year. I know everyone wanted to, snap their fingers and hire a new trainer and never have an injury to discuss ever again. Right. And it's been the opposite. I mean, there's been so many, mostly minor injuries to discuss, although, the Austin Martin situation is a little bit worrisome. Obviously, we talked a lot about the Jordan Balazovic getting punched in the face and breaking his jaw. There's a slight update on that. Celestino being out for 6 to 8 weeks. So, yeah, I mean, some of these aren't so minor. And even
Ronnie Henriquez.
Yeah, is there hasn't been.
I have not gotten an update. I mean, I just got back here, so I haven't talked to anybody about it. So.
You didn't go immediately to the clubhouse
I did not
from the airport.
No.
What kind of reporter are you?
Yeah, well, because they wouldn't let me in at 8 o'clock at night. That's the problem.
I know a guy. He'll let you in the back. $50. It's like a Vegas hotel. They'll upgrade you. But Jose Miranda is seemingly a bit of positive injury news. Now, as we've mentioned, he showed up to camp, started working out normally. The big preparation all offseason was losing a little weight, getting into better shape with the mentorship of Carlos Correa, kind of pushing him in that direction. Correa basically said, I told him and other players, put in 10 years where you eat right, and you don't go out and you all this stuff, and then you can make all your money and you can be famous and people will love you. And then you could spend the next 50 years of your life doing whatever the hell you want. Which is John's message to me.
I think the actual quote was whatever the F you want.
Well, yeah. I do appreciate Carlos Correa will swear. I like that. As a website that will occasionally allow us to run the curse words. Do you guys run curse words in quotes?
No.
Twins Daily?
No.
That's your Puritan
yeah, I think we actually
religious upbringing.
I think not only do we not do it as like a matter of policy, I think the software flags it and won't actually print it. Even if you leave it in the story, it stars it out.
Well, that's effed up, John, is what that is. But yeah, so Jose Miranda lost some weight, got into better shape, all with the goal of, just being in better shape and trying to build on what was a very impressive rookie year to kind of say, okay, now I'm here, now what? But beyond that, he was doing it with an eye on moving to third base more permanently, going back to third base, which was his position in the minors. But then the problem was, they moved Gio Urshela to make that happen and all that. And the problem was he shows up to spring training, he starts working out at third base, and he has a sore shoulder.
Right.
And they shut him down from throwing for what is now, a couple weeks probably, right? Basically since they announced that officially.
Listen, the first game we saw was Saturday 24th or something like that of February.
Yeah.
And even then he was DHing. So it was certainly hurt by then. It was certainly sore by then. So it
took us a minute. It took us a couple of games to collectively say, oh, how come he's only a DH?
So as of tomorrow, will be 2 weeks. God, we've only had 2 weeks worth of games. The first game was on the 25th. We had the doubleheader on the 25th.
Right.
So
let's go on.
That is tomorrow, is that. So we know it's been 2 weeks since that. So
right. And he said, actually, not right away, but within that first week or so, I've been through this before, a couple of years ago in the minors. 2 weeks off basically fixed it. I'm hopeful that'll happen again. And thankfully, so far, it sounds like that's the case. He said yesterday, I think Doe quoted him, Doe Young Park from MLB.com quoted him saying, I feel better. We're going to start to ramp up the throwing. I'm going to do some throwing at half speed, 50% effort. And then if that's okay, then I'm going to start playing in third base in games, which is, what the Twins want to see. The goal, obviously, they'd love to have gotten him 1 billion reps at third these last couple of weeks. Right. And they'd love to not be limited for these next 2 or 3 weeks. But the goal is to have him ready to play third on opening day and be primarily a third baseman, at least early on in the season. The bigger, the interesting part is,
and we still are almost 3 weeks from opening days, right? So if he gets his arm up to speed here in a week, we'll have 2 weeks or so of him being played for third base.
Yeah, opening day in Kansas City is 20 days from now. So
right,
but the interesting part is, like you mentioned, he just has been DHing, which suggested to me, and I think it's true, that the shoulder injury was not believed to be serious,
right?
Because it's one thing to be like, well, it only really hurts when I throw. And it's another thing to be like, it only really hurts when I throw. Also, I'll just go out there and hit like normally. Right. And he had homers in 3 consecutive at-bats over 2 games. Right, I think he has 4 homers overall.
I think that happened since the last time we recorded. Like that happened like that last weekend, right?
He's crushing the ball, which is great to see. Obviously, regardless of whether Jose Miranda is your starting third baseman, your part-time third baseman, your starting DH, first base, whatever,
right.
The bat is what's carrying him. Like the bat is what makes him exciting. All that other stuff is just sort of,
right.
On the margins of his value. And for him to show up in better shape, the power, the 20 pounds he lost or whatever didn't sap any of the power. That's always my fear with myself. That's why I can't lose that much weight. I'm worried about my power. I don't want to become a singles hitter. Miranda.
One of the things you're fond of kind of pointing out is, if he can't play third base, they'll just move him to first base or DH, whereas, maybe move Kyle Farmer or one of the other guys. Like we've got a bench full of guys that probably are not first baseman / DH, but are going to get some at bats there, right? What it means, though, if he can play third base, is it allows you the chance to make a move mid-season or at the trade deadline
for a big bat,
and bring in a really big bat. Or next offseason. Like this is a process where they just want to see how he can do at third base for a year, and if he can hold it down for 2023, 2024, 2025 before he ends up being pushed out of the position at some point, fantastic. Then that gives you that much more flexibility at first base and DH to either rotate people in and out to rest at DH or to get yourself a legitimate difference maker that you can plug into the middle of the order. So.
Yeah, and we talk about the defensive spectrum a lot. The idea that you'd love for anybody to be able to play catcher or center field or shortstop. That's one end of the spectrum,
right?
But as we talk about a lot with prospects, as they almost everybody, if you're a great high school or even college player, you're a middle of the diamond player at that point most of the time.
Right.
Like we always use Miguel Sano when he signed with the Twins at 16, he was a quote unquote a shortstop. Like, okay, whatever.
Right.
You move down the spectrum. You go, shortstops go to third base or second base, or sometimes third baseman like Miranda. Well, actually, Miranda was drafted as a shortstop also, but go to third base, and then he moved to first base last year. And the benefit, like you mentioned, and Joe Mauer was always an example of this, but just in general, is the further on the difficult side of the defensive spectrum, the shortstop, catcher, center fielder side, that you can keep someone and have them be a passable even defender there. It has huge benefits, not to the defense necessarily, but to the lineup, because there's only one first baseman and only one designated hitter. And for instance, I remember when Joe Mauer was winning Gold Gloves and Silver Sluggers at catcher, and people said, well, why is he so valuable? Like, if you look at his hitting, there's 20 first basemen who out hit him, like the power numbers and everything. And it was because he hits like a first baseman, but he takes up the catcher position, which then leaves first base and DH open for Justin Morneau or Jim Thome or, Nelson Cruz, that type of thing. And so that, I think, is the key with Miranda. It's not that his value is going to be much different at third versus first or DH. I think it could be somewhat better at third if he's like an average-ish third baseman. But if he's a below-average third baseman, that's not much more valuable, in that context than just being a decent first baseman.
Right, you lose the bonus you gain for playing third base. You lose if you suck at third base, right? Like you give back runs, right?
Absolutely. But the thing you just said, which is, okay, well, if he's at third base, which is where they want to play him, that means if healthy, Alex Kirilloff can be at first base. That means the DH spot, they can continue to rotate guys through with matchups, which is what they really want to do. Or it means Trevor Larnach can be the DH. Or 2 months into the season, Matt Wallner can come up and be the DH and just be a slugger. Yeah. It just means you can just figure out what, honestly, Ed Julian can come up and play first base or DH. But if Miranda is instead across the diamond at the other end of the defensive spectrum, and he's playing first base or DH, then all of a sudden you only have room for Kirilloff and nobody else. And then all of a sudden you go, well, where are we going to fit Larnach? Where are we going to fit Wallner? Where are we going to fit Julian? And it becomes a tighter squeeze. And on top of that, what you also mention is, well, then who's playing third base? Kyle Farmer, Donovan Solano, Nick Gordon. These are all not bad options, but they're not players you want to play every day. And so you end up
certainly not middle of the order bats. Right.
So you end up kind of trading the flexibility of having Larnach, Wallner, Julian, somebody like that playing first base DH when Miranda's at third, versus you're basically swapping one of those guys for Kyle Farmer or swapping him for Donovan Solano in terms of the lineup. And so that's the added value that gets tacked onto Miranda.
Well, I'll also just mention, like you said, this is something that the Twins are dealing with Miranda, but it's also something that we've seen deal with across so many different players, in part because they have players with a lot of flexibility.
Right.
Maybe they have pushed a little bit too hard, or maybe not too hard, but who are they're trying to keep at, more higher on the defensive spectrum, right? So you mentioned Julian. I mean, he's another great example of this, right? Somebody who they clearly want him to get as much time at second base as possible to see whether or not he can whether or not he can be a passable second baseman, not even an average second baseman, right? But just somebody who's
just someone you don't consider a butcher there, I'll
also bring up old friend Luis Ariz.
Yeah.
I mean, Ariz is another guy where they never ultimately the answer they settled on was I think he's a first baseman.
Right.
And as such, he became expendable. I mean, not something that they
right.
Which
it changed the way you perceive his values. They still got good value for him. I mean, we talked about that trade a ton, but once he was in the same bucket as Kirilloff and Larnach, and for that matter, Miranda and guys like that. And once you're saying, okay, well, he won the batting title last year, but he had a 810 OPS. And then you go, well, how does that compare to first baseman and DHs? Well, it's good. It's not like amazing.
Right.
Once you're compared to that, then it changes things. And we saw that down the stretch last year. Ariz was great as a first batting title. It kept him healthier. He was, I thought, passable right away at first base defensively. But then we saw what happened when Jorge Polanco got hurt for the final month, basically, or longer, I guess, 5 weeks of the season, that they didn't feel comfortable moving Ariz back to second base, whether because of defense or injuries or, he was getting comfortable at first base, whatever it was. So then all of a sudden you had like Nick Gordon playing second base, and they were kind of scrambling to fill that slot. And that's a perfect example, which is Ariz is still in the lineup either way.
Right.
It shouldn't really affect his value if he's a below average second baseman or an average first baseman defensively, whatever. But it just, by moving those pieces around, it either closes or opens doors for you to use your other bats. And like you said, I mean, flexibility with the Twins, especially for infielders, obviously, is become such a focus for them. And we've seen it with, they've played Austin Martin at shortstop long past the point at AA that anybody really considered him a viable shortstop. Now he's hurt, so that's on hold. But you mentioned Ed Julian playing second base. Brooks Lee's playing shortstop, and he'll probably go to the minors and play shortstop. Not because the Twins think he's going to be their everyday shortstop, because I don't know if people have heard, but they signed a guy to a long-term deal to play shortstop. But because there's no doubt. Well, there is downside, like in terms of reps, but the belief is like, okay, what happens if Correa gets hurt for half a season? Then you want Lee to be able to play shortstop, and you're showing off these guys for other teams that maybe view someone at their highest position that they could possibly play. And there's also just the belief that, if you prove to be a good shortstop, moving to third or moving to second or moving wherever isn't that difficult. And we've seen it even with the outfield. Royce Lewis played outfield because they thought he's got the tools to play the outfield. I think they envision, and it doesn't surprise me because Baldelli comes from a Rays organization that did this more than any team I've ever seen under Joe Madden, especially, but they still do it. They would have lineups where it was almost like the positions that day were chosen out of a hat. Like it's the same 7 or 8, 9 guys. But like one day, and Madden even did this with the Cubs. I remember he would have Chris Bryant, who was the reigning MVP. And like twice a week, he'd just go out and play left field instead of third base. Or he'd go play first base, and they'd have Ben Zobrist just bouncing around the diamond. And there's definitely a belief, I think, especially after last year, when there were times in September of last year, the Twins had 9 healthy guys and couldn't figure out how to build the defense around them because they just had 3 first basemen and 2 left fielders and whatever. They just love the idea of grooming these prospects to be able to play basically anywhere.
It also, I hadn't thought about this, but this is almost a non-sabermetric point of view, but it also allows them to try and find the right magic formula, for lack of a better word. Like if you're in the middle of a stretch where you just don't think you're scoring enough runs, well, then maybe, you go a little bit worse on the defensive spectrum,
right?
But you get more big bats into the lineup, right? And you make sure that Miranda is going to be at third base, and I'm going to move, a bat into the. I'm going to call up, Julian to play first base, something like that. That's how I'm going to. That's how I'm going to address this power problem that we've got, or this offensive scoring problem. On the other hand, if you're like, well, yeah, we're scoring runs, but geez, look, we're booting the ball all around the field. Well, maybe, we get Farmer over at third base, and we're going to put Miranda at DH or at first base, right? And we're going to put Larnach at DH, something like that. It does, and we're going to put Taylor in left field, or Gallo at first base, and Taylor in left field, and you could F around with things a little bit to try and find the right mix.
Yes.
Overall, I'm not sure that it changes the value of the lineup very much, right? Like you said, whether or not does it matter where Miranda is playing in the field, whether he's playing DH versus where Farmer is, etc. But it does allow you to sort of react to other teams that you're playing, or to the
in matchups too. Let's say you're facing a lefty and you go, we just want as many righty bats as possible. It obviously helps if some of those righty bats, if Kyle Farmer can go out and fake left field for 6 innings, it helps him get into the lineup. And I also just think if you have mostly guys who are kind of locked into one position, even if they're very good at that one position, and one of them goes down, a second baseman goes down, then you're like, well, who do we have who can play second base and fill in for him? And that's by definition, that's very limiting. Like if you don't have a top second base prospect, then you're just playing some utility guy there or whatever. But instead, if your second baseman goes down and you go, well, we got 2 shortstop prospects and a third base prospect, and actually this guy who's playing first base can play some second base, and then you're not having to go as far down on the list of understudies before you get to somebody who can step in and actually make an impact. And I think that's kind of the scenario, that the utopia of fielding flexibility that the Twins envision. Now, saying someone can play a position and having them actually be able to play the position are sometimes 2 different things. Although I didn't think Julian was he didn't look out of place in the, 5 games I saw him play second base. He looks not like a major league, he's a great second baseman, but you wouldn't look at him and go, this guy's never played second base before. I mean, he turned a couple of double plays. He makes most plays that are hit to him. I mean, that's kind of what they're asking for, basically. Yeah.
But I mean, the other thing is that, it's great to discuss flexibility and the advantage to flexibility. You'd probably still trade. I want a good number 3, number 4 hitter in my first base at DH spots.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? As opposed to the flexibility of being able to, have Michael Taylor roam the outfield and left field because I can move Gallo to first base. I mean, that's all fine and good.
Yeah, you still have to have the talent on hand. I mean, if you're just moving around pieces that aren't that good to begin with, then it's just a different version of
that's exactly
that.
Right. That's kind of my point. And this is a reaction to. I mean, this could be viewed as a reaction to not being aggressive early in free agency for some of the bigger bats that were available because they were busy pursuing Correa, right?
Right.
And it might be valuable more so for 2024 than it is for 2023, or for, like you said, maybe at the trade deadline, we find out that, who's the Pittsburgh guy?
Brian Reynolds.
Yeah. The Reynolds is going to be moved, something like that. Well, maybe we've got room for Reynolds that they can go out and get something like that too.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to worry about the flexibility of who's playing, but being able to plug in Kyle Farmer or whatever at first base. Like, I got my first base.
They also just have a lot of major league ready or double A or higher hitting prospects.
That's true.
Lewis and Lee and Julian and Wallner and Austin Martin if he's healthy, and I mean you just go on, and you have to figure out how are these guys going to all fit in the lineup? They aren't going to all fit in the lineup. I mean, you still have, by the way, Correa at shortstop, so that's out. You still potentially have Polanco for another 2 years after this one if you want him. We'll see how he bounces back from injury and all that. But somebody from that infield group's going to wind up in the outfield. Somebody from that group's going to wind up at DH or first base. Right. And especially if you include like Kirilloff and Miranda in that as quasi prospects basically.
Well, both corner outfielders this year might be gone in 2024.
Right. I mean, there's a lot to sort through, which is a nice problem to have. Like, just here's a whole bunch of talent. Right. Figure out how this fits best in, what combinations fit best. And, you're relying on those guys to get healthy and perform well and you to choose. It's self-scouting. We talk about that a lot, which it's one thing to identify who to trade for and who to sign as free agents, which is huge. But, who to not trade and who to hold on to or who to make available when their value is the highest can be huge too. And that's, I was asked on my Athletic mailbag the other day, what's the Twins infield of the future? I was like, well, I listed all the guys I just listed. And I was like, I think they would love it to be Correa at shortstop, Brooks Lee at third base, Lewis at second base, Kirilloff at first base, and, Miranda or Julian at first base DH, some combo of that. But even then, I just listed 3 guys for 2 spots at the first base DH part. I haven't listed Austin Martin at all. I also haven't listed Jorge Polanco, who could very easily be one of their best players again this year and is under team control for 2 more seasons. So, I think it's exciting, but also it doesn't surprise me that they've made flexibility a priority given that, and you have to sort that out, but then also just given the disastrous situation that they saw unfold and collapse around them late, in August and September last year, because they would have killed for guys who could play a couple of more positions.
Of course,
they were trotting out some lineups that were like, this is our only configuration of 9 players that could feasibly work. Here it is. Go beat the Guardians or whatever.
Well, it's nice that Nick Gordon can bat anywhere or can play anywhere. We still have to have a batting fourth because everybody else is
called out to
play right now.
That's a whole nother issue. Okay, before we move on to a whole bunch of other news and notes, including an update on Nick Gordon, let's talk about our 2 sponsors here. One of which, HelloFresh. If you're trying to get into better shape like Jose Miranda did, I haven't asked him if he used HelloFresh. Maybe I will. Here's how HelloFresh works. You go to their website, which is HelloFresh.com, and they have all kinds of customizable menus. They have menus for families. If you got kids who are picky eaters, if you are vegetarian, they have that. If you just love steak, like the bonuses, they have that. And you can kind of pick and choose what you want, and it's fresh menus every week. And it really, you can look at it. You can look at what the ingredients are. They send it to you with all the ingredients pre-portioned and packaged and fresh, right to your doorstep. And they send you a recipe card, but it's like such more than a recipe card. Right. It's got step-by-step instructions that are very detailed with pictures, which is very helpful for me, who, when they say like, chop some ginger up, and I go, what the hell? What?
How do you chop ginger?
Pictures of it.
Right, exactly.
It's very helpful. Right. So I know you and Chrissy cook it all the time and post pictures, and it always looks like restaurant quality.
That is, listen, we also cook our own meals sometimes, but one of the differences with HelloFresh, it always looks great. It's always got, it's got little touches on it. Like one of them, they've got this hamburgers, right? They've got a couple of different types of hamburgers that you can have, but it's got a special, you end up creating like a bacon jam or something on top of it, stuff that you would never, ever consider doing yourself, right? They give you the instructions and they say, here's what you do. It turns out it's not that hard to make a bacon marmalade or whatever to put onto your burger.
We don't know how to cook at our house, and we've done HelloFresh, and the pride I feel for making an edible, actually good tasting thing that actually looks decent is off the charts. And the other thing is, if you're going out of town or you just don't want it for a week, you can pause it. You can pick and choose how many different meals there's into you each week. All that stuff is all customizable. Here's what our listeners can go to: HelloFresh.com/Gleeman60, the number 60. And the reason it's 60 with the promo code Gleeman60 is you get 60% off plus free shipping to try it out. So you go to HelloFresh, HelloFresh, HelloFresh.com/Gleeman60, and then use the promo code Gleeman60, like 60, and you get 60% off plus free shipping for the whole thing.
HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. And then
our next sponsor, is
RotoWire.
Yeah, John and I have
baseball season coming up here, and if you have got, you think about get some Twins players, and you're like, I wonder if they qualify at second base. Do they qualify? Did they get enough? Did Nick Gordon get enough at bats last year?
The discussion we just had, yeah,
exactly right. RotoWire could totally handle that for you. In fact, they've got all these customized. You can customize your cheat sheet for your league, so you can put in things like, oh, I need a minimum of three starts at catcher for them to be able to qualify for catcher or something like that, right?
Yeah, whatever the odd rules that you have in your league with your 7 college buddies that you guys have warped the reality of fantasy baseball, they can handle it. They are also not
just. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Not just that, but sorry.
Don't say go ahead. And then
I know. You can actually type in give the URL of your league, and they will pull in your league into RotoWire, right? So it'll do things like, we noticed this player is available on the waiver wire. You should maybe go think about picking them up because you need something at third base. It's almost like having your own personal scout, and they pull in all the big leagues like Yahoo and ESPN and CBS and something like that. And they can, you say, if with your team like this, you're probably going to finish third. You might want to consider making some trades to help you out in this particular category, something like that. So,
and the deal that they're offering is a totally free trial. And when I say totally free, you don't even have to give them your credit card. That's how free it is.
Yes,
because they're confident. And honestly, you can sign up for the free trial that we're about to tell you about. You can draft all 47 of your fantasy teams in the 10 days or whatever they're giving you for the free trial, and then you can quit. Guess what? You maximized your free trial, and they're fine with that because they realize that many, many people who try the free trial are going to realize the value of the product because it's such a good product. John and I have been paying subscribers to RotoWorld for like over a decade each.
Yes.
Long before they said
20 years.
We'd like to advertise on your show. So here's all you have to do to get the free trial. No credit card required. Is go to rotowire.com/Gleeman. That's rotowire.com/Gleeman. Use it to research for fantasy baseball. Use it to draft your leagues if that's what you want to do. Rotowire.com/Gleeman for the free trial. Okay. We mentioned Nick Gordon has a high ankle sprain.
Right.
Sounds like a couple weeks probably for that, which should give him some time to get ready, but you never know with ankles are sometimes tricky, but it sounds like they feel like they at least avoided, ligament damage or something, a broken bone or something like that. He looked not great when it happened. He was in a huge boot, an hour after the game in the clubhouse, but so they're somewhat hopeful there for the discussion we just had in terms of defensive flexibility. He's key for that. I mean, I don't know that he's going to play a whole lot of shortstop this year, but he's certainly second base, left field, center field, maybe some third, honestly, maybe a lot of DH, I think, versus right-handers. If Larnach doesn't end up making the team, I think is a possibility. So he's become this. A year ago, this would have been a crazy discussion to have, but Gordon has really become something because of the work he put in offensively, especially, but just getting stronger, getting healthier, able to put on weight. Just his ability to drive balls into both gaps, I think is such a credit to him and, David Popkins, the hitting coach, who was a rookie hitting coach last year. I know really worked a lot with him. I think Dan Hayes has an article coming out Monday about that. Nick Gordon ankle injury last spring. I don't know that we would have been just a little footnote here, but now it's like, well, they need him back, or that's going to change the construction of the roster for sure.
Yeah. What I did not anticipate, I don't know that anybody anticipated. Certainly the Twins never talked about it publicly, is the possibility that he would develop some power.
Yeah.
That changes everything about him. That otherwise you are taking a look at him and saying, well, he's D. Gordon without the high batting average, right?
Right. Who's his half brother, D. Gordon?
Yeah, positional flexibility, but without the batting average, well, it turns him into a Ben Revere-ish type player, something like that, right?
Right.
But if he can hit it out of the park, and we saw hints of that last year, especially versus right-handed pitching, right? And it seems to have been a area of focus for him. What is he, 25, 27? It might be
26,
27.
I think, something like
26, something like that. Yeah, that changes his ceiling considerably if he can hit 15 home runs a year. And I don't know that that's totally crazy. I would have thought that was totally crazy prior to last year.
No, I mean, if they gave him,
it still might be totally crazy.
500 at bats. Now, I don't know that they want to give him 500 at bats. Obviously, that probably means some other things went wrong with the roster. But if you gave him 500 at bats, I don't think 15 homers is that crazy. Now, it might end up being 11 homers and 35 doubles or something like that. Like, right. But the power is legitimate, and he's still one of the skinnier people I've ever seen. Right. He's going to be 80 years old.
Right.
I mean, like, he's going to be 80 years old. He's going to weigh 172 pounds. Like, that's just how he is. That's how he's built. But he went through so many health problems, including getting a pretty bad case of COVID in 2020. But he had gastrointestinal problems before that. Like, he got down like under 150 pounds, I know, in the minors, and people were evaluating him because that's what all they had to evaluate. And it was like, well, I don't know if this guy's a shortstop.
Right. And
he weighs $110. Right. He slaps the ball around, and it was like, is this guy even a prospect? And he was on the verge, honestly, of completely falling off the prospect radar. He was on the verge of getting dropped from the 40-man roster by the Twins.
I heard multiple times that he was going to be the odd man out on the 40-man roster.
I mean, I think that's fair, honestly, given where he was at that point. And now it's like, well, might he be their opening day DH? Like, imagine that. If I would have told you even 2.5, 3 years ago, Nick Gordon, yes, this Nick Gordon is going to start at DH for the Twins on opening day. And honestly, not going to bat 8th or 9th. And people are going to be like, good lineup. I like that. It would be just mind blowing. So yeah, hopefully he is back in a couple weeks. It's one of those injuries. Similar thing. Trevor Larnach is ready to play again.
Well, he played
he played on Tuesday, like a week with a groin injury.
We haven't seen him since, but he played on Tuesday. Yeah, we'll see if we maybe see him in the lineup today on the road in Sarasota.
The last of the debuts that we haven't seen on the position player side, at least, are Buxton, Polanco, Kirilloff.
Right.
And, it's not easy to do the math on why those are the guys we haven't seen. Buxton, they all ended last season on the injured list.
Right.
2 of the 3 had surgery.
Right.
Polanco, I don't think, had surgery. Did he?
As far as I know, he did not have surgery.
Right. But it sounds like, at least as of a couple days ago, Kirilloff is getting somewhat close to game action or progressing towards game action. I haven't heard a ton about Polanco, although a week ago,
I haven't either.
Baldelli said to me Polanco would probably debut in a game before Buxton. I don't know that still holds true because I'm in Minnesota. But then I know, because we've gotten so many questions about this, like, what are they hiding? Why aren't Buxton and Polanco especially? Why aren't they playing in games? And I'm not here to tell you that they're 100% and they're both going to be all-stars this year and nothing's wrong physically. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is the Twins and a growing number of teams don't see that much difference or that much added value in spring training games versus simulated games and work in the batting cages and live batting practice and backfields work and all that stuff. And we saw it with Correa, who waited until March 1st to debut, and he basically said, he got a hit in his first at bat, and then he talked to us afterward, and he said, well, I wasn't just sitting over here sitting on the couch while the guys were playing. Like, I was getting more at bats. Like, I can get 50 at bats in a day of live batting practice or cage work instead of waiting 2 hours to get 2 at bats in a game. And I think Buxton, especially, even during the regular season, is not someone who takes batting practice on the field, or very, very rarely takes batting practice on the field. He's a guy who likes to work in the cage with the hitting coaches, likes to be able to stop between pitches and analyze and look at it and, take kind of out of the spotlight cuts. And I know Doe had a video yesterday of him on a backfield, live batting practice off a pitcher throwing 100%.
Right.
Larnach was taking BP in that spot, and I think Garlick was the other one in that round of BP. Like, they will tell you, with Buxton especially, that not getting into a game or not having played in a game doesn't necessarily mean anything other than he's working on the side. Now, I would say, just from a sort of fan morale standpoint, go ahead and get them out in a game at some point. Like, if only so we have to stop answering unanswerable questions about this thing. But I mean, I do think, let's see, it's the 10th right now. I would say if all three of those guys are still not in a game by like the 17th, 18th, 19th, like a week plus from now, then that starts to become a little bit strange. I don't think we've reached that point now, particularly when, if you're in Fort Myers, like John is, you can see these guys working out, like,
and taking at bats,
right, and taking live at bats off of real major league pitching. It's just not in game situations. So take from that whatever you will. But
we had a conversation. I mean, literally the last conversation we had with Baldelli before we both flew home, right? Where you asked specifically about those three, and
he did a brilliant tactic to initially evade my question, which was I asked him that, and he went, "Ooh, I got to get a beer." And he cracked a beer, and then he was like, "You guys want a beer?" And then like 30 minutes later, he was he knew his audience.
We had a long talk about hazy IPAs from Northeast.
He knew he was in a room with Phil Miller and John
Bonus.
Yeah. And so then 20 minutes later, you guys are having a beer conversation, and then that peters out, and then someone just asks another question.
Right.
And I'm just sitting there going, well, okay. And so I wait until it's over. And then as we're getting up to leave his office, I say, so officially, is that no comment on Buxton, Polanco, and Kirilloff? And then he basically said, no, let me give you a comment, and said what I've described with Buxton, which is he's getting the work. He's getting the at-bats. They just are not occurring, on the main field at Hammond Stadium from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m.
Yeah, the point sort of seems to be, I would say, first of all, when people say they need time to get ready, what they really mean is they need to get time to get their timing down, right? And his point was Buxton has gotten more at bats than Correa has gotten. It's just that Correa gets 4 in a game every other day, and Buxton is getting if that 3 or 4 in a game, right? And then Buxton's been facing more live BP, more live game type action at the plate than anybody else. So we are handling the timing aspect of it. Now, we did kind of follow up a little bit on that, and I was sort of non-committal on the response on this. The question was sort of, is this a strategy to keep down the wear and tear prior to the regular season of playing in the field, with specifically with Buxton and Polanco, right? Like, do you, is this, we talked way too much at the beginning of 2022 about trying to give Buxton time off during the season so he's not running around center field, and, get him some time at DH or give him a full day off or that sort of thing, right? Well, why aren't you doing that? Why, if he's got the timing down either way, does it matter if he only plays three games in center field the week before spring training versus having 15 games in center field throughout spring training? Is that a pretty good way to keep the wear and tear down on his knee, or knees or whatever, or his hips, all the different things that can go wrong with Buxton? Is that the wear and tear? Playing center field, and that way maybe he gets an extra 5 or 6 games during the regular season. It would be sort of the thought process, right? And you could also say the same thing about Polanco, right?
Whereas I think Kirilloff
is the same boat, right? Yeah,
is different. Kirilloff is working up towards building back towards something. Like Kirilloff needs to check a few boxes before they clear him to play in games.
Right. For him, it's about the at-bats, not about the fielding.
Right.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think, and for that matter, we've seen a week ago or whatever. I mean, they were doing drills defensively one morning, 10 a.m. on a Tuesday or whatever, and Michael Taylor's out in center field, chasing after ball, hitting a cutoff man, practicing all these little situational things. Byron Buxton was out there in center field running around. Didn't appear to be in any pain or limping or anything like that. Right. So I do trust, to the extent that you can trust such a thing, that Buxton especially, and I do think Polanco, although I haven't seen him as much, they're not held back because they can't do something physically right now. They're held back because they prefer it, or the Twins prefer it, or to your point, they're avoiding wear and tear, or he just thinks I'll rather take 50 at bats in the cage during the day than 3 in the game. Now, like I said, 10 days from now, if we're having the same conversation, it starts to get a little bit, something. You just
start to wonder. I mean, we had enough issues last year where we thought somebody was going to be back, and then they were never back.
Well, right.
There's you start questioning it's a show me game, and sooner or later you want to be shown, right? So there's going to be questions up until the point where we see them in the game, but you can understand, that philosophy being, why are we wearing these? Why are we starting the wear and tear in, early March or end of February when we can start it in late March, especially in the field. So long as their timing is back,
Let's talk a little bit, finish up here about some pitching stuff, because I feel like we've been talking about position players for the whole time. The continued theme of spring of two things I would say: everyone's throwing harder than ever. Right. Everyone's got at least one new pitch, which is kind of like best shape of your life. Spring training. It's a real spring cliche. But it's interesting being here and having gotten to know that cliche as an outsider for 20 years or whatever.
Right.
Being here and watching, Sonny Gray working on a new cutter, throwing 5 miles an hour faster. And then after watching him throw a handful of them, going down to the clubhouse and asking him about it, and watching, the conviction in his eyes,
right,
as he talks about,
they want to talk about it. Yeah,
the work that is being put in, and the impact they think it can make, and the adjustments that are still needed, and all that stuff. And it's not, it's not as easy as just flicking a switch, and all of a sudden you throw 6 pitches instead of 5 pitches or whatever. Right. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Pablo Lopez talked about adding kind of a east-west sweeper curveball to his normal kind of north-south, more traditional curveball. I mentioned Sonny Gray's working on throwing his cutter significantly harder than he did before. Tyler Mahle went to a drive line. Dan wrote about this yesterday, I think. Went to drive line in part to try to tweak his slider to make it more effective against right-handed hitters, which has been a weird non-strength for him in recent years for a right-handed pitcher. There was one more, but I mean, Bailey Ober's throwing faster than ever, harder than ever. 94 miles an hour for Bailey Ober. We talked about Nick.
Right.
If you would have told me 3 years ago that Nick Gordon was this type of player, if you would have told me 3 years ago that Bailey Ober was throwing 94 miles an hour, I'd be like, is there another Bailey Ober? Like, what are we even talking about? Bailey Ober was throwing 89 miles an hour 3 years ago. So there's all that, and I think within that. And then you have Kenta Maeda coming back from Tommy John, obviously, which is a whole nother thing. Joe Ryan has also tweaked his slider and is trying to transition from a kind of traditional changeup. Oh, there's a sneeze. That's the thing you only get on this podcast. Non-mic sneeze.
Where's that cough button?
Traditional changeup. We need a cough button. Yeah. There probably is one here that I could do. A traditional changeup to a split changeup, which is more of a Jake Odorizzi type of fall off the table thing. So almost every starting pitcher in the entire rotation plus Ober is either working on a new pitch or working to throw harder with more break on some of these pitches than ever before. Now, maybe a month into the season, that's all forgotten and they all just look like their normal selves or whatever. And we don't even remember that this was a big storyline early in camp. But I don't know. It is interesting. I think the velocity thing especially makes sense to me in that A, velocity is just rising year over year across baseball. We've seen that. But B, this is the first like normal full-length spring following a normal full-length offseason since 2019.
Right.
And so particularly given that last season was very not normal, last offseason, because of the lockout and guys like Sonny Gray showed up completely unprepared to pitch because they thought they'd have more time and they were involved in the negotiations and all that stuff.
Right.
And so I think people almost like overcorrected for this offseason on the pitching side because they were so frustrated or felt like they were put at such a disadvantage by what happened last offseason.
And it cost them like not just a couple weeks, it cost them the year.
Right.
Like Sonny Gray ended up battling injuries all year. Tyler Mahle ended up battling a sore shoulder, a fatigued shoulder all year because of it. It wasn't just I'm going to not be effective for the first 2 weeks of the season. It was, I've got to gear up, and now I've pushed it too hard, and it's a problem for 6 months. So
yes, I mean Sonny Gray especially. I mean Sonny Gray was the Twins' best starter last year, but he had 3 different stints where a hamstring injury kept him out for a couple of weeks at a time, and also, he at this point in camp. Well, they hadn't even reported to camp at this point. But, when he reported to camp, he was so far behind that, he didn't even appear in games. He was just thrown on the back fields just because he was trying to work up. And he even said last week, I probably shouldn't have even been pitching in April, realistically, because I entered spring training in a place where to build up to 3-4 innings was such a struggle for me because I hadn't really thrown all offseason because he was involved in all the lockout stuff. He thought they were going to end the lockout and say, okay, 4 weeks from now, everyone report to spring training. Instead, it was Monday, everybody reported to spring training. And so compared to this year, he's ready to go. He put in all kinds of work during the offseason, just physically. He looks very strong in his first couple of outings. He seems just much more, I don't know that he's ever lacked in confidence, but he seems much more focused and confident. And I mean, that would be huge for them. If he could even be as good as last year, but for 175 innings instead of 120 innings, that would just be so massive for the Twins. A couple other...
I think we both agree that, I know you got notes to get to, but I think we both agree that the area I'm most comfortable with right now is the rotation.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Right? Yeah,
have we ever said that in the history of this podcast?
I would say in order, it is rotation, bullpen, and lineup right now.
Do you feel the most comfortable with the ball? I do not abide by that ranking, but
you go bullpen least.
Yeah,
rotation. I go rotation number 1, bullpen number 2, and lineup number 3. But you go rotation number 1, lineup number 2, bullpen number 3.
Yeah, it also just feels weird to have lineup be its own thing. But I get what you're saying, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I don't think their bullpen is in the best position it could be. I think I get why they chose the bullpen as an area to sort of save resources,
which do that every offseason. So,
right. And
year after year.
I don't necessarily disagree. If you told me we have to save resources in one of those 3 areas, I would pick the bullpen every time.
Right.
But I think there's quite a bit of room between that stance, which I think is logical, and the one they took, which is literally not adding anyone to the bullpen. Now they will tell you we added Jorge Lopez at midseason and Jorge Alco's coming back, and we got some prospects waiting, and that may well be true. I'm not here to tell you the bullpen's going to be terrible. I just think the bullpen is a little shakier now before they even go to battle here,
right?
Than it needed to be. I think if they would just signed one more, and the guys they did choose to invest in, Emilio Pagan for $3.5 million.
Right. Yeah.
I've told myself I'm going to wait till opening day to really talk a lot about that. But
I'm with you.
I'm with you.
Yeah. I mean, so long as Emilio Pagan is in that bullpen, I probably should not be ranking them anywhere above.
Right. Well, and my feeling is just okay. Pagan, who's probably going to be in the lower leverage role to start out, which is fine. But then, who are you relying on? Well, you're relying on Jorge Lopez a lot. And, Jorge Lopez, if he's at his peak, has proven to be a really, really good reliever. We just haven't seen it at all since the trade. You're relying on Alcala being healthy, which, if true, but if he's not 100%, he doesn't have the longest track record. And also you're relying a lot on just Duran continuing to be the best reliever in the league, which I'm not saying he can't be, but if that's kind of what is needed just for you to have a pretty good bullpen, it's not a house of cards, but there's a lot kind of leaning on each other there. So I do wonder, on the other hand, if we start to just see some of these prospects called up and thrown into the bullpen, or even a healthy Josh Winder thrown into the bullpen mix, you don't need to see a good bullpen coming as much as you do with a rotation and a lineup is kind of what I would say. It's very possible to look at a bullpen on paper on March 10th and go, it's not that good. And then look at it on May 10th and go, well, I didn't see these 2 or 3 guys being a great setup, man. They came out of nowhere. We saw that with Duran last year. So let's just to finish up on one or two other things. Just want to check all the boxes here before we go. There was one other. Let me. Balazovic with the busted jaw.
Sure.
Got optioned to AAA. He was the first cut of spring, a solitary roster move, which I think is in part just because that's what they do with injured players. But the timing of that, I think, was a little bit of a message being sent, which we've both talked and written about. Then the next two roster moves that have been made, the only three that have been made so far, are Balazovic being optioned, Austin Martin being optioned, or being reassigned to minor league camp, because you're only optioned if you're on the 40-man roster. If you're not on the 40-man roster, you're reassigned. Reassigned Austin Martin and Michael Hellman to minor league camp. Michael Hellman has had a hamstring injury for all of camp, so he was going to be unavailable. And then Austin Martin, as of 5 days ago or whatever, was shut down with a ligament damage in his elbow, his right throwing elbow.
Right.
The same injury, ulnar collateral ligament, which is the Tommy John surgery injury, basically. He has a sprained UCL ligament. It's been shut down. Obviously, the hope is that he avoids surgery, which is possible. I mean, there's a ton of outcomes, especially when you're talking about position players instead of pitchers here.
Yep.
But it's not, I mean, he was never going to be a shortstop anyway, but this definitely means he ain't going to be a shortstop. I mean, I think that would be highly unlikely at this point, but he looked pretty good early in camp too. He's playing a lot of second base. He was doing some running. I talked to him early in camp and I wrote about him. He certainly was like, I'm in a good place. I got back to being myself at the plate at the end in September, and then carried it over to a really good Arizona Fall League. And it's unfortunate because he seemed really confident and really optimistic, and felt like he, after a struggle in the first half of last year, including a wrist injury, he felt like, I'm feeling good mentally, physically. I'm ready to kind of get back onto the prospect scene here. And now, even if it's a best case scenario, he's not going to be ready to begin the season.
Yes.
Probably would have been at AAA St. Paul. So that bears watching. He's one of their best prospects. And then let's see, there was one other, I don't know.
Have we seen Winder yet?
No.
Do we know if Winder's doing bullpen work yet?
That I don't know. I would guess yes.
If I see him, I'll ask him.
Yeah, he's a friendly chap.
Yeah, he is. Good, easy one to talk
about. Virginia. There was one other. I wanted to, since we talked so much on the last episode about the new rules and how players were reacting to it, and how our first impressions of the pitch clock and stuff, seeing it in action and all that. Jeff Passan from ESPN tweeted out an apples to apples compare, because it's easy to say, the time of game has been 2.5 hours. Last year, in the regular season, the time of game was 3 hours. Except spring training games are always going to be shorter than regular season games for the most part, because there aren't long commercial breaks, and
they just seem longer.
Well, that's true. Yeah, because nobody wants to be there. Everybody's got dinner to go to. Yeah. But so he posted, Jeff Passan from ESPN posted spring training 2022 versus spring training 2023, some numbers, and I thought we'd finish on that. So it's very interesting. Time of game last year, 3 hours, 1 minute for the average spring training game last year. This year, 2:36. So you've cut 25 minutes.
Wow.
That's kind of what the estimate was based on the AAA stuff last year.
It's even a little better than the estimate, right?
Yeah. It was like 20 minutes. Steals per game, stolen base attempts per game, excuse me, which they, increased the size of the bases, and they changed
real quickly. Is this compared to last year?
Last spring.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Last
spring was an interesting spring, though. It was a shortened spring training because of the lockout and so on.
Sure.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Last year, 1.6 stolen base attempts per game. This year, 2.4 stolen base attempts per game. So 50% more stolen base attempts. Here's another one. Batting average on balls in play for ground balls.
Okay.
Which is the entire intent of changing the shift rules. Mm-hmm. That a hard hit ground ball up the middle or towards right field has a higher chance of getting through for a hit if the fielders are limited in terms of where they can position themselves. Last year, the batting average on balls in play for ground balls in spring training was 235, which means if you hit the ball on the ground, your batting average was 235, which is pretty bad. This year, 258. So 23-point jump in batting average on balls in play,
Okay.
which is,
That's
you
big.
can do the math on that. And then the last one was strikeout rate. And this one is not quite an easy connection to make, but I think the hope was that giving pitchers less time to focus on every pitch and to recoup physically,
they thought maybe it would go
pitches.
down.
Yes, because velocity will go down a little bit, or just sharpness of sliders will go down,
Sure.
or just kind of focus on this singular pitch goes
I'm
down.
betting it did not go down.
It did, but not as much as these other things. I mean, these other are big jumps. But so last year, the strikeout rate for Major League Baseball in spring training was 23.9%, and this year it's 23.1%. So less than a percentage point drop, but a drop. And by the way,
I'm actually surprised there's any drop.
Right.
And not because
strikeout rate has been rising year over year over year for a decade plus now. So
I'm surprised there's any, just because what we have seen is pitchers were so much more prepared coming into camp this year than they were last year. I expected last year to be a lower strikeout rate than we saw this year, regardless of the pitch clock or any of that other stuff. I just thought this is a more prepared group. So
I agree. It seems like that. So here's his final stat. I wasn't even going to cite this one, but I will, because what you just mentioned, runs scored per game.
Okay.
Just overall between the two teams last year in spring training, 10.6 runs scored per game. So 5 and change per team. This year, 11.0. So almost a half run more, despite what we've just talked about, which is pitchers certainly seem primed and ahead and, closer to 100% than a lot of the hitters do. So, I mean, all of this, now it's early and it's spring. And like you said, last year, comparing it to last year has maybe some trickiness involved because it was a weird camp and all that. But the intention or the goal of all these rules changes across the board was to make the game, the pace of play faster, with less just nothingness, to get people to put the ball in play more, to have it less reliant on strikeouts. And then once those balls in play happened, to make the infielders especially, less capable of turning them into outs. And then once guys got on base because of all those singles, to motivate them more to attempt more stolen bases. And honestly, across the board here, I would say somewhere between significant change and small change is what we're seeing, on all 5 of these things, or whatever box you need to check, which I don't know. To me, it's interesting. We'll see how it goes. And I will also say it took me about 10 minutes to get used to the faster pace and some of these rules and stuff. It's not something, nobody's going to be sitting there in June going like, I can't watch baseball anymore. And I think even among the players, the number of violations per game has already been cut almost in half compared to the first week of spring training. So I think there's which is what we saw in AAA last year too, which is, it started out, everybody had a problem. Everybody was getting used to it. A month or 2 in, it was, there were still a couple of them called.
It's something that you can get used to in a hurry.
Yes.
It is not an oppressive thing to step back into the box within 7 or 8 seconds of the last pitch. That's just that's not a big deal, right? It's not that oppressive to be able to throw another pitch 15 seconds after you got the ball back from the catcher, right? Like,
and so many of these videos that we've seen from spring training games where it's the most extreme case where an inning ends or a game ends because the batter wasn't facing the pitcher at 8 seconds and all that stuff, and people are like, this is what the baseball wanted to happen. All of them can be solved very simply. Get in the effing box. That's all. I have no sympathy. If you were in the box and they just pulled some weird loophole out of the thing and called a strikeout, this is all very straightforward. Do not step out of the box. Do not take a little tour of the stadium between pitches. Like, get in there. You will have none of these problems. And so I have, and I'm actually been pleasantly surprised by the Twins pitchers that we've spoken to about this, how either neutral or even in favor of it that they are.
Right.
Even, we've had a few of them who have gotten some weird violations and been like, it's going to take some time to get used to, and it might keep me from doing this or keep me from doing that. But almost to a man among the guys likely to be on the opening day roster and starting pitchers especially. And some of these guys have been 10-year veterans. Almost all of them have said, I see what they're going for. I kind of like it. It's got we need to smooth out some rough edges, but I think by mid-season, it's going to make for a better game. And that's all you could really ask for, is for someone who's potentially individually negatively affected by it to be able to push that to the side a little bit and see the bigger picture of this thing, which is I was a little worried that we were going to show up to spring training and start asking pitchers about it, and they were all going to act like it was the worst thing they've ever seen in their entire lives and oppressive and all that. And instead it's been like, it's kind of weird. It's going to take some getting used to, but I think it's going pretty well. So
I was going to say, I think if you do a survey, maybe I'll try and do this, just a Twitter survey or something of fans sometime by end of May, and you give them 3 options. And those options are, I dislike it, it's fine, or I wish we would have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I anticipate we will get more people with the 10 years ago than don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, like even something that extreme. Like I can't believe we waited 10 years to do this. We are idiots for not doing this 10 years ago, right? And I think similarly, I think by the end of the year, you would even hear the same thing from players. That more players would be like, I can't believe we ever fought this. Because it was the MLBPA, which was absolutely fighting it, right?
That's the thing with baseball, almost always. With rules changes or realignment or changing the playoff structure or whatever it is. Right. By the end of a season, and sometimes even a month in or 3 months at the all-star break of a season, the reaction is almost always, it's fine, or why did we even, what was the fight even about? Or like, I don't even remember that. And it's really remarkable how caught up in that baseball gets more so than any other sport. And I've gotten to the point where I almost like laugh at any initial pushback on any rule in baseball. And I'm someone who hates change in life.
Yes,
like
you are not a big fan of change.
Yes, I like everything to be the same and pre-programmed and all that. And even I at least have the self-awareness as a lifelong baseball fan and now someone who does it for a living to be like, let's assume that all these changes are going to be fine. Even when I dislike some of them, like the extra inning runner on second base and some of this other stuff, it's like, it's not that big of a deal. It's slight alterations to a game.
Are you ready to apply that to your own life, though? Your whole life now?
Oh, God, no.
That's going to be a step I'm going to be really looking forward to.
Oh, no, John, I'm a tremendous hypocrite when it comes to that.
I've got a base now. I've got a handhold.
Yeah. How much did Becky pay to bring that up on the podcast? I came home from Florida and she swapped out our living room rug for a different rug, and I'm on like day 6 of being like, I don't know, I kind of miss that old rug.
Do we have a cat update?
Yeah, we're shopping for a cat.
Okay, you are shopping.
Looking at
you have not gotten the new cat yet.
No, here's what I've learned, and we'll shut up in a minute here. But here's what I've learned: I like every cat. So we're like on all these adoption. We're gonna adopt one, which is how we got our last cat. Yeah. And he's great, Teddy boy. But so we just go on like Pet Finder or all these individual places. You know, you set the limit of 50 miles from the Twin Cities or whatever, and we just text each other back the profiles of these cats. And every one, I'm like, that's the cutest cat I've ever seen. Let's get it. And it's like, well, you can't do that. You'd have 400 cats. So now I'm like, I like them all so much that I'm almost waiting for like a thunderbolt from one.
Right. Yeah, of course.
To be like, this is, love at first sight. And I don't know that's ever going to happen because, they're all cute. But yes, we're going to get one before opening day is the plan, certainly.
I tell you what Lisa's fiance was trying to convince Chrissy to do?
No.
While I was in spring training, get another skipper key.
Yeah.
And then gaslight me. Like another female skipper key.
Okay. Well, that's morbid now.
What are you talking about? Nothing's wrong with Shar. It was very weird of you to be like that.
Yeah. No,
because I'm gonna make her wait until probably fall before we get into the dog appointment. If you just get one now while he's gone, you can just start calling her Shar and everything.
Wow.
He's going to want to believe anyway.
I mean, that's kind of that's funny, but morbid. But even beyond that, here's the truth of the matter. With both of us, or really any right-thinking human being, if your partner or wife or girlfriend or whatever that you live with, while you were on a 2-week or whatever vacation or trip, got a new pet, you would come home and love it.
Of course.
That's the thing, right?
Of course.
It's not like you'd come home and go, I hate this guy. We got to get rid of him. No, there'd be about 3 minutes when I was like, I can't believe you did this without me. and then I'd be cuddling on the couch with the cat, and then I would die for the cat. That's how it works.
Exactly
Now,
right.
living room rugs are a little bit different, and pitch clocks are a little bit different in terms of change. But
Sure.
I'll take any animal. Any animal that wants to sit by me on the couch is good with me. So
baseball changes and pets. That's the two things you accept change. Okay,
everything else
stays exactly the same.
Yeah, no change whatsoever. All right. Thank you to HelloFresh and to RotoWire. And if you like this show or even tolerated this show, and you would like even more of us discussing things, including some midweek mailbags and special guests and all that stuff.
We'll have some WBC performances to talk about probably on Monday.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of fun.
Right. I'm hoping Ed Julian makes a name for himself for Canada, so I can
hoping we see
my article that
I want to see Pablo Lopez in a start here pretty soon. Yeah.
Patreon.com/Gleeman, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman for our midweek episodes. They're $1 a piece, commercial free, hour plus, some curse words dropped. Which
I think you'll like it. I think we just did a mailbag Wednesday, and it could not. I think it was really fun to do a mailbag of wide open topics. And
the mailbags, like I mentioned on that show, the mailbags have become the episodes I look forward to most.
Right.
Because they're the ones that are here's my capacity for change. And control. They're the ones that are least in our control.
Right.
We're sort of handing the wheel over to the listeners for what should we talk about?
Right.
What weird stuff should we talk about? All right. Until then.
Bye-bye.